My name is Anthony, and like I was introduced, I'm a pastoral resident all the way from Liberti, Harrisburg, and it is so great to be back with you guys at Liberti Northeast this morning. I came to preach here last summer, and you wanted me back. I don't know why, but I'm grateful that you did. But this time, instead of coming alone, I got to bring my wife, Jenna, with me. Jenna was also a resident at Liberti Harrisburg, but since his transition to being the director of community. And I say all that to say, the residency works. It's a good program. Pastor Evan's been doing a really great job overseeing that, and Jenna and I are really grateful for his leadership over it and to be a part of that. So if you're considering ministry, talk to Evan about the residency. He did pay me to do that. And I want you here at Liberti Northeast to know how grateful we are at Liberti Harrisburg for you guys. We're so excited about what God is doing here. We're really pumped about Kyle and Liberti Bristol taking off and that team planting that. So we're going to continue to pray for you guys and see how the Lord continues to bless and use you in your community. And so right now, with all those introductions out of the way, I want to jump into the words of Jesus that were read, and I want to continue that reading in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. So we're going to read together verses 19 through 24. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, nor where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And you can tell from the sermon text that we've read this morning that I will be continuing you in your series on the Sermon of the Mount. The Sermon of the Mount is the longest recorded sermon of Jesus in the Gospels. And so that means that we should probably pay pretty close attention to it. And so this morning, we're going to be looking at what Jesus has to say about treasure and about money, and about how we as followers of Jesus should handle those two things. The last time that Pastor Evan came to preach at Liberti Harrisburg, he spoke on money, and so I guess it's only fitting that I get to return the favor. And as I was thinking on these verses, as I was meditating on these verses, I kept noticing commercials, and I kept noticing advertisements, and they would pop up while I was watching a TV show or a YouTube video. And while all these ads were a little different, there were common themes and common things that they were doing to try to get me to buy whatever it is that they were trying to sell. Especially ads for like drinks or clothing or furniture. Instead of just telling me everything this item had to offer, so often these ads would spend all of their time showing me beautiful people in beautiful places, doing all these really exciting things, surrounded by friends and family who look like they are having the time of their lives. You all can probably track with me because you've seen the same ads. And as I kept seeing this over and over again and reflecting on the words of Jesus here in Matthew chapter 6, it became more and more clear that these ads were advertising something so much deeper than just something to purchase. They were trying to sell me, and they're trying to sell you on the kind of person we should be, on the kind of person we should become, on what is important in life. And the first step in that journey was to buy whatever beverage or shirt or couch or whatever it is they were advertising. And similarly, in this passage, Jesus is showing us that when it comes to our possessions, when it comes to our treasure, it's so much more than just about money and objects. And so if you heard the passage and you thought this is going to be a whole sermon on how you should be giving more, welcome back. You can tune back in now. It's not just about that. Instead, this passage and these words of Jesus here are about the kind of people we are becoming and about who or what ultimately has authority over our lives. And so Jesus does this by giving us 3 word pictures, one about 2 treasures, one about 2 eyes, and one about 2 masters. 2 treasures, 2 eyes, and 2 masters. And we're just going to walk down through those. So the first passage we'll look at is this one about 2 treasures in verses 19 through 21. And just note here, we're going to be spending the bulk of our portion here because these verses really help to frame and set up the verses to follow. So in this passage, Jesus says, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So in this passage, Jesus is contrasting storing up treasures on earth versus storing up treasures in heaven. And the first step in unpacking and thinking through these words of Jesus is going to be to figure out what he means by treasure. Because the first thing that I think of when I think of treasure is pirates, or a buried box of gold hidden in some cave and only accessible by like some map. And immediately you can tell a lot about me. But just think of the last time you heard the word treasure and that wasn't somewhere in your head. Now, our temptation might be to say, well, obviously it's not about that, but it's just money or wealth. That is treasure. And while that may get us closer to the idea, that definition may be a little bit too narrow. Because it's more than just money. It's more than being just about money. And to really understand how Jesus is using this word treasure, we need to understand this in a first century mindset when Jesus was giving this sermon, where valuable items like clothes or precious metals or even food would be hidden away and stored for a later day. They'd be passed down to future generations or sold during a time of crisis. And so treasure is something of value that offers security and safety by those who possess them. Something of value that offers security and safety by those who possess them. And with this in mind, it's understandable then why Jesus is warning this crowd about storing treasures on earth. Because if all your hope and security were found in these valuable items you had scurried away, then the threat of rust and moss, the threat of thieves and burglars, they would constantly be on the forefront of your mind. And moths and rust here are consuming threats. They are something that gradually, over time, will eat away, and you won't even be aware of the damage done by moss and rust until it's far too late. Before moving to Harrisburg and working at Liberti, I lived in Baltimore, where I worked for a rug cleaning company as a master rug cleaner. I'm sure that many of you here are not even aware that's a real job. And trust me, it barely is, right? Like, barely there. But I really enjoyed this job because I got to work with and restore these beautiful rugs from all around the world. And these rugs weren't cheap. They were costly rugs, some even costing tens of thousands of dollars. And so at any given moment, we had hundreds of these rugs at our shop. And the thing that we feared most, the things that kept us up at night working in this profession, was moths. And if anyone ever saw a moth in the shop, or even thought they saw a moth, or they saw a moth around the shop, This was a hit the panic button moment of emergency, and we would take the next day, pull every rug off the shelves, roll them out, and see if there was any damage. Because if a moth was allowed to set root in our shop anywhere, it would destroy our whole operation. And then along with these gradual consuming threats like moths and rust that do damage without you even knowing, there was the sudden threat of thieves who would break in and steal your treasures before you even knew what had happened. And while those of us in this room likely don't hide our treasures in the same way, probably not anyway, I am making an assumption, and the threat of moths and burglars and thieves probably aren't what's actively keeping us up at night for the most part. We do have treasure. All of us here have treasures. And they have the exact same risk. A sudden downturn in the market could spell disaster for your investments at any moment. An unforeseen event could wash away everything you have hoped and worked for. An unexpected layoff could dash your dreams of corporate advancement. A health crisis could totally change the trajectory of your life. And as I read through that list, I know that so many of you could even check a few boxes yourselves. You've been through that. You know what that's like. You know how quickly life can change, how quickly a guarantee can fail, and how quickly your safety nets won't hold up. And so Jesus is saying, don't store your treasures here on earth, where they're not guaranteed, where they will not last, where they will be consumed or stolen, or where their value will just suddenly fade away. But instead, store them in heaven, where they will not be eaten away, where they won't be consumed, where they won't rust, where they will be safe, and where they will last. And so then the next question for us to think through is, where's your treasure? And that may be an easy enough question to ask and to just put out there. But once you start to actually put thought into it, it can be hard to determine what you're actually treasuring. What is your treasure? What is that line between the things you need versus the things you enjoy versus the things you treasure? It can be hard to pin down. And I think here that Jesus is assuming that we're going to be asking that question because in verse 21, he gives us a pretty direct answer. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well." Jesus doesn't just tell us to store up treasures in heaven because they'll be more secure there and then just keep moving. Instead, he links our treasures with our heart and tells us where one is, the other will be. And so with these words of Jesus, we can run a self-diagnostic and know where our heart is, where our affections are, and where our treasure is. And know that when we talk about the heart here, and as Jesus talks about the heart, he's not just talking about the organ that pumps blood through our bodies. Instead, he's talking about the core of a person. Pastor R. Kent Hughes puts this really well, and he says, the heart here refers to the whole inner man, the core of our total being, the wellspring, the origin of all that we do. So if you really want to know where your treasure is, the first thing you got to ask is, where is your heart? What's driving you? What is motivating you? What is bringing you joy? What is bringing you peace? What worries keep you up at night? And what fears and anxieties are lying wait for you in the quiet parts of your day? And as you begin to think through these questions, they can become a mirror, allowing you to see where your heart is and where your treasure is, because like it or not, they are linked. And then from there, you can ask yourself, Are you laying up treasures on heaven or on earth? Are those things driving you? Those things constantly on the forefront of your mind? Your dreams, your ambitions, the things that you're looking to for safety and comfort? Are they things with any eternal value? Or will they one day fade away? Are they things that God in his scriptures have called us to prioritize? Or are they things that we might think matter a little more than all that? Is it climbing that corporate ladder for a job that, best case scenario, you retire from and never go back to again? Is it building a financial portfolio that one day is going to dry up? Is it the appearance of success for those around you that one day will collapse? Or is it things of lasting value? And please know, I don't mean you should just be giving more to your church. Giving is a real part of this conversation. And how we spend our money can give us a great gauge on things that we do actually value and what our treasures are. And rethinking your giving may be something the Spirit of God is impressing you to do in light of these words of Jesus. That could be true. But this is a much broader question. Because it's not just a question about how you spend your money. It's also one about how you spend your time, about how you spend your energy, about how you use your resources, about the years you have on this earth. Are you investing in those things which are eternal, the things that last, the things that God in his scriptures call us to do? Sharing the gospel and being a light to the world of the goodness of God. Being the hands and feet of Christ to those in your community who are hurting and to those around the world. Building healthy relationships with friends and family and walking this long road of Christian obedience together. Where's your heart? Where's your treasure? And let me encourage you to really wrestle through that question. Even take time this week or in the weeks to come, take out some pen and paper, do it old school, and write down where you think your treasures are. And don't worry about being overly precise. Don't worry about getting it exactly right. The whole point of this exercise is just to raise your awareness of what you're treasuring, because you are treasuring something. And then after you have this list, walk through it with someone in your life that you trust, whether that be a spouse or a friend or a mentor, and evaluate together where your treasure is and where your heart is. And fair warning, it may be a painful exercise. The best exercises are often the painful ones. And that's okay. And if there are things on this list that are of fading value, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with financial security. There's nothing wrong with doing well at your job or having a hobby or interest that you spend way too much money and time on. But if those things make up the majority of your list, if those are the things that you are looking to find hope and security and joy and purpose, know that they won't last forever and they will let you down. And let these words of Jesus challenge you to reconsider what you are treasuring in your life and where your heart is. And so that is the two treasures. And next we're going to move on to the next word picture that Jesus uses about two eyes. Two eyes. Jesus says here in chapter 6, verses 22 through 23, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, then your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, our temptation, in all honesty, may be, as we read these verses, to overlook them. Because let's face it, they're a little confusing. But I do want to spend some time here and unpack these words of Jesus, because they are vital as we continue to talk about our treasures, because they build toward the final verses in our passage this morning. So Jesus begins this word picture by saying the eye is the lamp to the body. And this would have been a much more normal phrase to the immediate audience of Jesus he was speaking to, but it's not so much to us. We read about healthy eyes and bad eyes in this passage, and we're probably prone to think biologically, right? We got cones, we got rods, whatever that means. Honestly, I still don't know. And if you have a bad eye, it's probably because you have an infection or you stared too long at the eclipse. But how Jesus is using this imagery and how it would have been heard by those gathered around him on the mountain that day was less of a biological statement and much more of a moral or spiritual one. The eye being a lamp to the body is because the eye is what directs the body. And an eye, rightly attuned, an eye seeing well, can help someone see and understand the world around them. Therefore, you can tell a lot about a person's character. You can tell a lot about what they're really like by where their attention is and by how they're interacting, for better or for worse, with the world around them. And so that here is how Jesus is speaking about the eye. And at this point, you're probably thinking, great, that's a fun tidbit of information. But what does that have anything to do with what Jesus has been saying up to this point? What does this have to do with treasure and wealth and generosity? And that's a great question. It's the same question that I had as I was studying out this passage. And as I looked more into what Jesus was saying here, biblical scholars point out that this term bad eye is much more about being covetous, being envious. It's about being greedy. It's the same word used later by Jesus in Matthew chapter 20 when he tells the story or the parable about the workers in the vineyard. So in this parable, Jesus tells of this man who owns this huge vineyard, and he needs workers to help him harvest the vineyard. And so he goes out in the morning, he recruits some workers, they all agree on a wage, sends them off into the field. Everything's going well and good. The only issue is he has a really big vineyard, so he's like, I need more help. So he goes out again at noon, hires more workers, they agree on a wage, sends them out into the field. Everyone's working, big happy family, going great. But he has a really big vineyard, and so he's like, I need even more help. And so he goes out later in the day, hires more workers, agree on a wage, sends them out in the field, and they're all working. And the sun sets and the day comes to an end. Everyone gathers around to receive their agreed upon pay, and the vineyard owner pays them. And he pays them their day's wages. And they each receive the exact same pay. Those who worked all day, those who worked half day, those who worked 1 hour, all received the exact same amount of pay. And so in this parable, those who started working in the morning complained about it. They said they should be receiving more payment. And the owner of the vineyard responds to them and says they received exactly what they agreed to work for. And then he goes on to ask them if they envy his generosity. And this word envy or begrudge, as your ESV translations probably put it, is the exact same word and usage that Jesus uses here in the Sermon of the Mount when talking about this bad eye. Because where was the eye of these angry morning workers? It was on the other's pay. It was warped with envy and jealousy. And so Jesus is saying here, when our attention is inward, when our focus is on ourselves, when we give way to greed and envy and jealousy, we're not walking in the light. We are walking in darkness. And when we're walking in darkness, we cannot correctly perceive and make sense of the world around us. Which is why Jesus ends these verses by saying, "How great is this darkness?" Because it affects us so deeply when our eyes are glued inward, and when our treasure and the things that we value in life all have us at the very center, when we become the center of the universe. And so in light of these words of Jesus, I want to revisit our exercise from earlier. And so as you sit down in the days to come and spend time evaluating your treasure, add this to your rubric and see how much of your treasure is centered on yourself. How many of the things you treasure are in search of your own fulfillment or are purely for your own benefit? And then how many are outside of yourself? How many of them are focused on advancing the cause of Christ or caring for those around you? And then let these words of Jesus expand your view of your treasure. And let it be a warning not to walk in the darkness of self-obsession, but to walk in the light of the gospel, which calls us to not just look out for the needs of ourselves, but to look out and to deeply care for the needs of those around us. To use our resources to advance the kingdom of God and to model Jesus Christ, who humbled himself to death on a cross so that we could be made sons and daughters of God. Oh, the generosity, the selflessness of that action should inspire how we live. So take time to evaluate where your treasure is and who is at the center of those things that you value. And so now we move into our last few verses, the big crescendo of this section of the Sermon of the Mount, which admittedly is a sermon with a lot of crescendos. So now please turn your attention to the final words of our passage as we hear Jesus tell us about two masters. No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And so finally, with these words, Jesus is answering the question, why? Why this is all so important. Because so far, Jesus has warned us against accumulating treasures on earth because they will one day fade away. He has warned us against being blinded by jealousy because that will cause us to walk in darkness. But this has led to the final of these warnings by Jesus, which is the most severe. That this search for wealth and this obsession with treasure, this isn't a neutral pursuit. The situation is far more serious and far more dire than we may realize. These things are trying to be our master. They are seeking a place of worship in your life, a place reserved for God and for Him alone. And it's helpful to note here that when Jesus says you cannot serve two masters, He means more than just having two bosses. Having two jobs and having two bosses is almost commonplace now. I'm sure we all have experienced that, and it's easy to comprehend what that's like. But this term master here is not just contractual employment relationship. This is all-encompassing loyalty and service. And left unattended, this desire for wealth and treasure, this bending our knee to the worship of money, will do nothing more than warp and twist your love and service of God. Because according to Jesus, you can only be devoted to one, and you will despise the other. You will love one, you will hate the other. So sure, you can have two bosses. That's easy. You can't have two things ruling over your life at the same time because both are seeking control. Both are trying to be your master. Both are trying to forge you and create you in their own image. One, into the image of God, into the person you were created to be, who worships and enjoys fellowship with your Creator, as one who experiences the eternal riches you have through Jesus Christ. And the other, into the image of the created, where you end up worshiping things that are not worthy of your worship, and you become controlled by your pursuit of things that will one day fade away. I love the way that St. Clare of Assisi puts it as she is reflecting on this topic. She says, "We become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. If we love things, we become a thing." And so now you are left with the question, who are you serving? Who are you becoming? And going back to our commercial illustration at the beginning, the world around you is trying to form you into something. It is trying to convince you that all these worldly treasures, all these things plastered across your television set and billboards, all the luxury in life drifting just outside of your reach, that all these things are worthy of your worship. And it's trying to turn you into someone who just consumes and consumes and consumes. But it can never give you what you're ultimately searching for. And so to those of you here this morning who would say that you follow Jesus, let me end our time by just encouraging you to serve and to love Christ above all else, to not be lured away by the false promises and flashing lights all around us, but to set your hope on Christ and on Him alone, to see the beauty of the gospel, which far surpasses all the glimmers of the world that will one day fade away, and to spend your time and energy and resources to be building a kingdom not of this world, a kingdom that will go on through eternity. And to those of you here who may not be a Christian, you may not call yourself a Jesus follower, and you're still trying to piece together what you believe. One, we are so glad that you're here. And let me just ask you to consider these words of Jesus, because like it or not, you know He's right. You know that wealth and possessions and success, they won't satisfy you. Because every time your bank account gets a little more full, all you can think of is, man, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a little more money in there? If you could have only a little more success, if your house only had a few more square feet, if you only had a few more things. And that's a completely human thing to do. I get it. I'm sure we all do that. But if that is where your hope is, if that's where your security and your purpose is, you're not going to find it there. You're only going to find letdown after letdown after letdown. So instead of looking there, let me invite you to look to Jesus. The scriptures tell us that Jesus died on the cross and was raised for the dead. And because He lives, He is our living hope, who has secured us an eternal inheritance for all of those who put their faith and trust in Him. And what this means is that through Jesus, you can be a part of the family of God. You can have fellowship with your Creator. And you can have a future that is safe and secure in the hands of Jesus. Let's pray. Father, how good it is to have our future, even our current, secured in You. Forgive us for the careless ways we store our treasures and for how much of ourselves we give to things, even to good things that have no eternal value, and we serve them instead of You. We ask this morning that in light of these words of Jesus, that You work in us so that we treasure the things which bring You glory and that we serve You above all else. Amen.